of the seat. Each of the crew members on board the Soyuz has a specially molded seat liner. They actually sit in basically a gutted out version of what you can see Wagner in right now, and plaster mold is poured all around them to conform to their body, and they get a special seat liner that is then installed in the seat, and that's why every single crew member also has a they have assigned seats. Chris Cassidy's in the right seat today. The left seater, also known as the board engineer in the Soyuz spacecraft, is essentially the backup for the center seat where the Soyuz commander sits. The Soyuz commander prime for all of the vehicle's operations, for manual control of the vehicle, should they have to take over for the rendezvous and docking or any of the other phases of the flight. And again, one by one, the crew's going through, getting a chance to do these pressure checks. We won't be seeing, again, the interaction through the glass. Pretty much all of the media, most of the crew family, spouses, children, and even a lot of the industry officials weren't permitted to travel to the launch zone for this. Just again, always keeping the health and safety of the crew paramount in all of the planning. Again, those individuals in the room are required to either maintain the exact same quarantine as the crew or wear a lot of the PPE, the personal protective equipment, in order to interact with them. This is a standard procedure for every single space station crew launching to the International Space Station. It's called health stabilization. It's been around as long as we've been doing these long duration flights.
Хорошо. Мы провели заседание государственной комиссии сегодня рано утром. Проверили все технические службы. Все идет по плану, все нормально, поэтому готовимся к пуску.
The commander of the Soyuz crew reporting. We are ready. Good luck.
Again, maintaining the tradition one final time, declaring they're ready for launch, and then they're on their way to the bus, waving a thumbs up there from Chris Cassidy, and then they get on the ride to pad 31.
Отходим.
And then once the crew arrived at pad 31, again, officials from their respective space agencies able to lead them to the final steps before they make their way up to the elevator, taking them to the top of the Soyuz booster. Again, about 160 feet tall, the Soyuz spacecraft sitting on top inside of a protective launch shroud.
Ivan.
Again, they were able to climb up those stairs, wave goodbye to the final well wishers there at the pad. Ride the elevator up to the top of the Soyuz to board the capsule, and as of this moment, they've been on board for about 2 hours. In fact, just before we came on the air, at about 1:53 a.m., they were getting ready to step through their leak checks on their spacesuits. They, about 5 minutes later, reported that they had completed all the leak checks on the hatches of the Soyuz spacecraft, and the crew kicked off those leak checks, closing their visors and pressurizing their suits. And we'll be getting a couple of views inside the cabin throughout our coverage and the ride uphill this morning. Right now the crew, last time we checked in, had their visors back open, but we'll see those get closed right before the launch begins. And as mentioned earlier, the road to this launch has been anything but normal, a little unusual, and it began with our cosmonauts, Ivanishin and Wagner, who were previously the backup crew, finding out that they were launching on this Soyuz spacecraft, and that occurred just a few weeks before the final training began, or the final training exams began, which ended up turning out to be pretty good timing.
Of course, it was a surprise. We thought that we would be flying in October 2020, but life happens.
Closed right before the launch begins. And as mentioned earlier, the road to this launch has been anything but normal, a little unusual, and it began with our cosmonauts, Ivanishin and Wagner, who were previously the backup crew, finding out that they were launching on this Soyuz spacecraft, and that occurred just a few weeks before the final training began, or the final training exams began.